thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this talk on travel to Scotland. My name is Julia, and I work here in Rick Steves' headquarters in the tour sales department. I have lived in Scotland. I had the pleasure of living in Scotland for a couple of years. So now I really enjoy getting to talk about travel in Scotland as part of my daily life and my work life, and I'm excited to share some of these slides with you today. Scotland. Scotland is a land with a lot of cliches, I think. People have a lot of preconceived ideas about the types of things that you encounter in Scotland. Probably a few of those are hopping into your head right now. So we're going to talk about a couple of those. Why visit Scotland, and what are some of the things that you might find there? Whiskey? Anybody? Scotland exports a lot of whiskey, and they also drink a lot of whiskey, so it would be good of you to head over there and help them consume some of it. Bagpipes, men in kilts, women in kilts as well. You definitely find those. Golf, of course, Scotland is the home of golf, so there's a lot of that, many, many courses if you would like to partake. Castles galore, some of the famous hilltop castles in the cities, but hundreds of them littered across the country, each in its different state of repair and different situation with its own unique history. Landscapes, of course, mountains, the highest mountains in the UK are in Scotland, so wild, windswept hills and moors and everything like that. Stunning scenery. Also a lot of ancient sites for people who are interested in, the people who came before the modern times. Beaches, white, sandy, pristine beaches. That probably surprised many of you, but it's true. Scotland has some of the most gorgeous beaches anywhere in the world, to rival the Caribbean if it weren't for the cold and the wind, of course. Excellent food. I feel Britain and Scotland have a pretty not so good reputation when it comes to being a place for delicious food, which especially in today's day and age is really unfair. A lot of wonderful food, great local produce, lamb, poultry, root vegetables, and everything like that. So when you're planning a trip to Scotland, just as if you were planning a trip anywhere, you probably want to pick up a guidebook. We have our very own Scotland guidebook, so that's going to have all of the information that you need for finding out when sites are open, how much does it cost to get in there, maps of local places, a little background, history, information, that type of thing. So you can pick up the Scotland book off of our website. If you're also going to be traveling in England, we also have a Great Britain guidebook. So it doesn't go quite as in-depth into Scotland, but that's a good option if you're traveling not only in Scotland, but in England or Wales as well. When you travel anywhere, there are usually a few things that it's good to know, maybe just to be kind of culturally appropriate. For example, if you're traveling in France, it's nice to learn how to greet people in the local language, say, "Good morning, sir," "Excuse me, do you speak English?" It's just kind of polite. And you already speak the local language for the most part in Scotland, so you've got that one down. But one thing that I think is a common faux pas is confusing Scotland with England, confusing English accents for British accents, which they are, but of course Scotland is a part of Britain. So just kind of getting things straight in our head about what is Scotland? Is it a country? Well, yes, it's a country, but it's also a part of the country of Great Britain. So it's really the northern third of the landmass of the island of Britain, which also contains England and Wales. So the name of the whole country is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So you've got England, Wales, Scotland, and also Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is on a separate island just across the water, and that is a separate country. It's an absolutely beautiful country, as I've already mentioned. Lots of coastline and lots of islands. To the north, you have the Orkney and the Shetland Islands, and then off to the west, you have islands as well. Over 700 islands in Scotland, but only a handful are actually inhabited. Different flags you're likely to encounter. You might see the European Union flag, the blue flag with the yellow stars. You might also see the British flag. Probably most people recognize that flag. What fewer people know is that if you take away the Red Cross of St. Patrick for Ireland and then the Red Cross of St. George for England, what you're left with is the Cross of St. Andrews, which is the flag of Scotland, and it's called the Saltire. So that's the one in the middle on that slide. With that in mind, Scotland being a separate country but also part of this larger polity, I just want to mention that it's a really exciting time to be traveling in Scotland and in the UK in general. This blue bubble with the yes, you'll probably see some of those around, and that is yes to Scottish independence. Scotland had the referendum on whether to become an independent country in 2014. It did not pass, so Scotland is still a part of the UK, but it was very popular. It was only about a 10% margin. So people are really interested and involved in local politics. They know a lot about it. And then, of course, more recently, the UK as a whole voted to leave the European Union. Scotland voted to remain. So it's a part of the UK, so it is leaving against its will. But anyway, very interesting time. So I encourage you to chat with people about what they think about all of this. As a part of the UK, Scotland uses the pound as their currency, so they're not on the euro. So it's British pound sterling. You have these nice heavy pound coins, and then also 2 pound coins. You also have pound notes in denominations 5, 10, 20, you know, the regular. They are color-coded. So different banks print different notes. In Scotland, there are 3 banks that print notes, but they're all color-coded. So all the 20s are going to be that purple color, all the 10s that yellowy beige, and all the 5s blue. So it makes it easier. You can use Scottish pounds other places in the United Kingdom, and you can, of course, use English pounds in Scotland as well. So you don't have to worry about keeping those separate or anything like that. That is going to work. And then, of course, 1 pound is just comprised of 100 pence. So you have your various coins as well. So you'll get the hang of it in no time. While primarily people do speak English in Scotland, Scottish English, which of course there are some differences between American English, you know, all English-speaking countries have different words and phrases that they use regularly, but actually there are a couple of other languages as well, real languages. So Old Scots is one, or Scots vernacular. Some people would say that it's actually not a separate language, but you know, an old branch of Old English, but anyone who's tried to read a poem in Scots will tell you that that's not true. It's definitely a different language. Also, Gaelic is spoken in Scotland. So probably most people know that in Ireland, people speak English and they speak Gaelic, Irish Gaelic. In Scotland, there's Scottish Gaelic, which is just called Gaelic. So you don't have to be able to speak it, but it's a lot of fun and very interesting aspect of the country and the culture. When you get into the Highlands and Islands, you will notice that all the signs are in English and in Gaelic. So it's a lot of fun. Not that many people still speak it, but as I said, it's a very important part of Scottish culture as a whole. In terms of logistics, when you are planning your trip to Scotland, you may fly directly to Scotland. Both Edinburgh and Glasgow have international airports. You may be also traveling in England, in which case you could fly to London and then book your return flight home from Scotland, or the reverse, fly into Scotland, fly home from London. To connect the two, you can fly, but I would probably recommend taking the train. They've upgraded all the rails, so it's actually only about 4.5 hours between London and either Edinburgh or Glasgow. So if you consider the time that it would take you to get to the airport, you know, go through security, checkpoints and everything like that, it just makes a lot of sense to take the train. You can also take the Caledonian Sleeper, which is a fun option. If you travel through Scotland and make your way up north to Inverness, you can get the overnight sleeper train all the way down to London. So just an option to think about. In terms of distances, between Glasgow and Edinburgh, you're talking about 50-minute train ride. Between Edinburgh or Glasgow and Inverness up in the north, that's about 3 hours by train. So it's not a terribly large country. It's about the size of North Carolina. In terms of getting around, you can take the train. The trains are very good. They're reliable. They don't go everywhere that you want to go. There are buses that go places that the trains don't go to kind of fill in the gaps. So those are both really good options. One thing that you should know is that if you book your tickets ahead of time for the train or for the bus, you will pay a lot less than you would pay if you bought your ticket that day, significantly less. And if you want to check that out, I would recommend going to a website, for example, scotrail.co.uk, just the Scottish train website, and you can pick any journey that you might be taking, pop in the dates for sometime next week, see what it costs, and then pop in the dates for a couple of months from now, and you'll see how much you would save by planning ahead. There are rail passes. You could look into that, but I would suggest either planning ahead or just knowing that you're going to pay a little bit more. In terms of train travel, it's, as I said, very straightforward. There are no ticket validating things necessary. I know that probably a lot of people here and watching this on YouTube have traveled maybe other places in Europe, for example in Italy, where you need to validate your ticket before you get onto the train or you will be fined. That doesn't happen in Scotland typically. There may be turnstiles where you have to put your ticket through the machine, through the turnstiles to be allowed to go to the platform and get on the train, but no validators. However, your ticket will be checked by the conductor, so just keep it with you and they'll come up, and after the first time they'll recognize you and they won't pester you for your ticket again, but hang on to it while you're traveling. This is Glasgow Queen Street Station, so it's, I'd say, the second largest train station in Scotland, pretty manageable, not too overwhelming. Waverley Station in Edinburgh is much larger, but still quite manageable. Some stations are even small like this with cozy indoor waiting rooms. When you are waiting for your train, there will usually be an electronic signpost telling you when your train is arriving and what platform, so it's very straightforward. Also, stops are typically announced ahead of arrival in that stop, so it's not too easy to miss your stop. You can also usually just peek out the window and see the name of the town that you're approaching. Another option is driving, of course. I know that this is a tricky one. People are put off by the fact that they will be having to drive on the opposite side of the road that they are used to, or for Americans anyway. And I just want to say that sure, it's different and it can be a little bit unnerving at first and take some getting used to, but it's really not that hard. You do get used to it. So just be careful. I would encourage that you take a look at what road signs mean before you head over. That will be really helpful. So you can just do a Google search and get a little bit familiar with some of those before you get on the road. You'll feel much more comfortable that way. And having a car is really great. It frees you up to be able to go places that you wouldn't be able to get to with the train, exploring some of that coastline and that type of thing. You can sort of see on this map the dotted lines are the train lines, train tracks. So with a car, you can really get into some of those more countryside areas and to the far north. And also you can explore the mountains. There are 2 national parks in Scotland, the Cairngorms, and then just north of Glasgow, Loch Lomond and the Trossachs. So if you want to be able to drive around or explore those regions, having a car really does help. Another method of transportation in Scotland, of course, is the ferry. If you want to go out to any of the islands, there are a couple that are connected by bridge, but for the most part, you'll be taking a ferry. And you can just walk onto the ferry, buy your ticket in the morning or buy it the day before, just so that you know you have it and you're not going to get stuck in the ticket buying line. The exception is if you are bringing your car onto the ferry, you should definitely book ahead for that. Another important thing to know for booking ahead for your trip to Scotland is booking ahead in Edinburgh for accommodations during August, because you have the Edinburgh International Festival, the Fringe Festival concurrently, and the Edinburgh Military Tattoo. So one thing to know is that accommodations will be a lot more expensive at that time and they will be a lot scarcer. It's going to be harder to find a room, so do book ahead for that. You also probably want to book ahead, and I'll talk about this in another portion of this talk, places like the Isle of Skye that are very, very popular with tourists, especially these days, and don't have a ton of accommodation. You'll definitely want to book ahead. If you're flexible and you're driving around and you'll stay wherever, typically you can get by planning just 1 or 2 days ahead, booking online for the next stop and that type of thing. If that all sounds like entirely too much and you don't want to plan it, or you'd like to go with a friendly group of strangers, you could consider joining one of our guided tours. They are 24 to 28 tour member groups maximum. People tend to be very laid back. We have a nice 10-day itinerary loop around Scotland, and you can learn more about that on our website or by looking in our tour catalog, which you can order a free copy of on our website. We have a nice new one every year with all of our European itineraries. And our website is a great place to just get information for planning your trip anyway. Lots of free resources. All of the resources there are just available for you. Tips on train travel, tips on places you might want to consider going with photos, lots of audio and video content, all that type of thing is on our website. So it's a great resource. When you're thinking about accommodations in Scotland, of course there are hotels, but B&Bs are really prevalent and they're a great option. They are, small and cozy. different stars or different qualities, different prices, of course, but generally speaking, just simple, comfortable rooms. Usually you will have an in-room tea service, tea and coffee that's available to you. Rick likes B&Bs in Scotland because he says he gets his own local mother for the week or for the few days that he's staying there. So that's fun. It's a fun way to get to know local people and just have a chat over a cup of tea and that type of thing. Also, they have oftentimes nice communal sitting areas like this one. And typically they come with breakfast. Some breakfasts are created better than others, and I'd say the Scottish breakfast is one of the best, but it is not for the faint of heart. It's full on, lots of meat options, kind of similar to an English breakfast, well, quite similar to an English breakfast, eggs, bacon, sausage, and everything. Usually you would have black pudding as well, a blood pudding, and also a potato scone, which they would call a tatty scone, of course, and it's not really a scone the way that we think of one or the way that Scottish people or English people typically think of one, more like a flat fried piece of potato bread, but it's really good for sopping everything up. That being said, Scotland tends to have a pretty heavy diet relatively, a lot of meat. You see glorious butcher shops like this, and I just want to mention that butchers often have not just meat for sale, but you can go in and get yourself a pie just for a quick cheap bite. You know, a pork pie or sometimes a macaroni and cheese pie, sometimes different pastries, something called a bridie, for example, kind of minced meat with onions. So lots of good options for just a quick bite on the go. Another popular food option if you're in Scotland or anywhere else in the UK or Ireland is eating in the pub. So just keep in mind that pub is short for public house, so they're also great places to just go and enjoy a convivial atmosphere. And have a couple of drinks, but a good place for kind of a budget meal too. And you have different classes of pubs. You have pubs with very simple fare, kind of greasy and down to earth, and you have others that are very upscale with a more full menu, and you can have a classy meal in there as well. Lots of soups and sandwiches in Scotland. I really love the soups, great blended vegetable soups. They have a soup called Cullen Skink, which is a cream-based potato soup with smoked whitefish. It is yum, 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 really good. So that's a great option too, sandwiches. And as I mentioned, great food, really underrated food, lamb and the like. Foodie food, also excellent seafood in Scotland, of course. You're never far from the sea. One thing that you should all try in a nice restaurant or in a decent restaurant while you're in Scotland is haggis. So some people are familiar with haggis, but for those of you who are not, haggis is sort of the national dish of Scotland, and it's kind of all of the extra bits of sheep diced up together, nicely spiced and seasoned with bits of oat and other things packed in there. Traditionally, it would have been inside of a sheep's stomach and then boiled and spooned out and served with potatoes and turnips, or neeps and tatties, as you'd say. So nowadays, it's not in a real sheep's stomach. It's just a synthetic bag, but it is really delicious. I'd recommend that you try it. And if you're a vegetarian, you can get a vegetarian haggis. It does exist. It's not the same, but it is pretty tasty, actually. Scottish people in general, of course, everybody is different. People are individuals, but I would say Scotland on the whole has a bit of a sweet tooth. Lots of really nice sweet treats like tablet. No, it's not your smartphone. It's basically a sugar and butter block of fudge. Really nice shortbread, of course, with caramel and chocolate, and you have often traditional sweetie shops. So I'd encourage you, if you do see a sweetie shop, a candy shop, go in and ask for a little sampler of different hard candies that are traditional and really delightful. Another unique sweet treat in Scotland is their national soft drink, national soda, which is called Iron Brew. And it is orange in color, but not orange in flavor. And I'll just leave it to you to taste what that tastes like. But Scotland is the only country where Coke is not the top-selling soft drink, and Iron Brew is. And it's really delightful, I'll tell you. It's also especially delightful with a curry. I don't know why, but it's just the most delicious combination. And there's plenty of that in Scotland as well, curry, Indian food, and Pakistani food. As I mentioned, sort of a heavy diet. Scotland is pretty far north, so not a lot of fruit is grown there. Of course, they import things, but one thing that they do have locally in abundance is berries. So I usually pick up a box of strawberries from the grocery store and keep them in my hotel room, and I just have a couple just to have something healthy and delicious too while I'm traveling in Scotland. Okay, I want to talk about urban Scotland. So specifically Glasgow and Edinburgh, which are kind of in the middle, southern middle of Scotland, just north of the border regions, just north of England, in what is typically referred to as the central belt of Scotland. They're about an hour apart, 50 minutes apart by train or driving, and Edinburgh, of course, is the main place that people, I think, visit when they go to Scotland. If you can only visit one place in Scotland, it makes a lot of sense to go to Edinburgh. There are 6 cities in Scotland, but in terms of population, most people live in Glasgow or Edinburgh, about 500,000 or 600,000 in each, about 1 million in the Glasgow greater area, and all of the rest of the other 4 combined don't really, maybe 500,000 between the 4 of them. When most people think of Edinburgh, the first thing that comes to mind is its hilltop castle. So that's where the city was born. It started out on the top of the hill. It's naturally fortified on 3 sides by sheer rock, and then it's just a gentle slope about 1 mile down the hill. So that's the original city that goes back over 1,000 years. So it makes sense in a visit to start at the castle, or definitely to include that on your visit if you don't do it right off the bat. So approaching the castle, you're met by Scotland's 2 most famous heroes, Robert the Bruce and William Wallace, on either side of the gates, and Scotland's motto, which I won't say in Latin, but essentially means "no one attacks me with impunity." So you get a sense of kind of this proud and tough Scottish history. If you're going to the castle, usually you'd want to either arrive as early as you can, first thing in the morning, or after 2 or 3 p.m., just later in the day. So it does get very, very, very busy, as I'm sure you can imagine, and also expect to be taking quite a hike. It is at the top of a slope, and it itself contains you. As you work your way up to the Crown Square in the castle, you're still going uphill. So it is kind of a hike, but well worth it. One thing that I think people don't always realize is that it's not just a castle. Of course, you know that there are many rooms in a castle, but it's actually multiple museums and sites inside of one site. So for example, you have the royal apartments. You have the crown jewels of Scotland are on display there. You have also the National War Memorial, and so there's a lot to do and see inside. So I'd say spend a couple of hours really taking your time and checking it out, and do a bit of reading about it before you go so that you know where you want to head as soon as you get inside. Just outside of the castle on the esplanade, before you walk up to the entrance, you will probably see some bleachers being put up or in the process of being taken down. That's just the case for most of the year. And what they're preparing for, or what they're tidying up from, is the Edinburgh Military Tattoo, which takes place in August as well. So if you're there in August, I would absolutely recommend that you go. It is a phenomenal spectacle, masked bands and drumming and Highland dancers and the works. So it's absolutely worth it. You'd want to buy your tickets ahead of time online. As I mentioned, Edinburgh Castle is at the top of a long sloping street. It stretches out for 1 mile from the castle all the way down to the bottom, where you'll find Holyrood Palace, which is the Queen's official residence in Scotland. That street is known as the Royal Mile. So it's one of the most fascinating historical walks anywhere in Europe. There is a lot of kitschy touristic stuff happening there, fun shops full of Scottish gear and blasting horrible bagpipe music out of them. But there's a lot of worthwhile stuff to do as well, and lots of shops that are very nice and are not just full of, tartan junk. For a more authentic experience with whiskey on the Royal Mile, you might pop into Cat and Heads. The folks who work there are absolutely evangelical about whiskey. It's straight from the cask, and they'll teach you all about it. When Rick travels in Scotland, he goes there and he gets himself a small bottle and he keeps it in his hotel room, and every night before he goes to bed, he just has a little nip. And it's a part of his Scottish experience every time, so you might consider doing the same. There are tons of museums in Edinburgh. You can't see them all with one visit, but the Museum of Edinburgh, telling the story of the town, the Museum of Childhood with fun toys and games from through the ages, the Museum of John Knox House, the famous reformer, Scottish reformer. And whether or not you are particularly interested in John Knox or the Scottish Reformation, one site that you definitely have to visit when you're in Edinburgh is St. Giles Cathedral. You can spot it. It's about a third of the way down the Royal Mile. It is easily visible as a part of the skyline with its thorny spire. So you definitely have to pop inside. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's the most important church in Scotland. It's actually not a cathedral either. It's the High Church, but for a time it was a cathedral, so the name has just stuck. But it's gorgeous inside, and it's full of Scottish regalia and pageantry, and there's also a nice cafe in the basement. John Knox's grave is actually outside in the parking lot. So true to his word of preaching austerity, he's buried just outside at number 23. At the bottom of the mile, you find Holyrood Palace, as I mentioned, but also the Scottish Parliament. So Scotland and England officially joined together in a political union in 1707. Before that, Scotland had been an independent country with its own parliament, its own kings and everything like that, a complicated history. But at any rate, in 1707, it voted its own parliament out of existence, and it did not have a parliament for almost 300 years. It now does have its own devolved parliament, so it's really interesting to go and check out the building, which is a glorious modern creation, and you can also go inside for a free tour and learn about the Scottish government. So they have control over certain issues, for example, education, the Scottish branch of the National Health Service, whereas other issues are reserved for the Whitehall government down in London. So, for example, foreign policy and national defense, that type of thing. So that's one thing to do. You could also tour the Palace of Holyrood. It contains the Queen's galleries, so some of the Queen's private collections of art, which are really nice. You can stroll the gardens. If you're interested in Scottish history, that's a good thing to do. Many of the museums in Scotland are free. This one is not free, but if you're interested in royal history or anything like that, it's a must-do. Another site that you might want to check out, in fact, you should check out if you're going to be in Scotland, and it's just in the old part of town, is the National Museum of Scotland. It contains artifacts from throughout the ages in Scotland. Half of it is built to look like an old castle, and half is a beautiful Victorian arcade. So this portion is sort of more sciences and things. It's kind of Smithsonian, eclectic, and fun for families. The other half that I just showed a slide of that looks like a castle from the outside is complete Scottish history from the geological formations of the country, through the Dark Ages, early kingdoms, through the Middle Ages, and so on and so forth, up through time. So you get to the Industrial Revolution. So it's about 6 stories, and it is really, really fascinating. This is a free museum, so if you're interested in Scottish history at all, you definitely have to check it out. And you can go in and check it out for an hour or two and go do something else and then come back the next day and see what you didn't get to check out the first time. That's absolutely fine. It's capped with a beautiful terrace on the rooftop. On a clear day, you get really nice views of the city and the water, so definitely check that out. So until now, we have been in the Old Town. So if you are looking at a map of Scotland, you see Edinburgh Castle down sort of in the bottom left corner. And from there, just stretching across the screen, is the Royal Mile all the way down to, as we just mentioned, the Palace of Holyrood. All of these kind of zigzaggy streets in that area, that's the Old Town, so that's the original Edinburgh. It came to a point where the city was so overcrowded, so smelly, and so confined, and this was in the 1700s, so during the age of the Enlightenment. And it was decided that Edinburgh needed to grow. It needed a new city, a new portion of the city that was fit for the new elite. And these are, artists and lawyers and great thinkers like David Hume and Adam Smith. So they drained a lake that had existed just to the north along the Royal Mile, just down the hill, but just to the north. They drained it out, and it's now beautiful gardens, Princess Street Gardens, and then to the north of that, they built a new town. So Edinburgh is actually 2 cities in one, and each of them, in its own right, each of them is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so recognized for its international important contribution to our culture. So they're really, really distinct and both worth checking out. So if you just head straight down the hill north from the Royal Mile, you end up in Edinburgh's New Town. So now I'm going to talk about some of the sites to check out while you're in the New Town. First of all, you might just want to enjoy some time in Princess Street Gardens. On a beautiful day, it's full of people picnicking and just hanging out. I mentioned that this was constructed during the Age of Enlightenment. Edinburgh's nickname up until this point had been Old Reeky, the old smelly city, you know. And then I think it was the men of the Enlightenment who gave themselves this new nickname, or gave their city this new nickname, but it became known as the Athens of the North. So, and it really shows big, beautiful palatial townhouses. New homes were built with the facades to look like a palace, and everything in pristine order, neoclassical design, statues at all the axes on the streets, and also lined up to have gorgeous views of the old town. So it's really thoughtfully designed and absolutely a delight to explore. The National Gallery in Scotland is full of lesser known works from some of the great masters of Renaissance art, Baroque art, Impressionist art, and lots of British painting as well, Scottish paintings as well, and some sculpture. So it's absolutely worth checking out. Again, it's a free museum. The second most important museum, I would say, in the New Town is, or I would say they're tied in first place, actually. I don't recommend one over the other. It just depends on your interest. If you're interested in Scottish history, I would definitely check out the National Portrait Gallery. Even if you don't have time to go through and look at all the paintings, just go check out the building. It is in a glorious orange or red sandstone neo-Gothic building. And when you enter in the entryway, if you look up, there's a frieze that has the paintings of all of the most important people in Scottish history throughout the ages. So it is really beautiful. And again, important Scottish people like James Watt, who revolutionized the steam engine, or Robbie Burns, Scotland's patron poet. Speaking of poetry, another fun way to connect with Edinburgh and with Scottish culture is by considering taking a literary pub tour. You just are taken around by a couple of actors to different pubs, and they do their thing, and it's a lot of fun. Or if that's not your thing, then you might find some local music. You can pick up the gig guide at Tourist Info, or even look it up online, and it will tell you the listings for live music that's happening, different genres all over the city every night, and that works in Glasgow also. Okay, Glasgow is the second city, I suppose, in Scotland. It's the largest city in Scotland. It's where the most people live. It's not the capital, but it's sort of a cultural capital. So a lot of the buildings are this beautiful red sandstone color. You see art on the street, and it's very famous for being the home of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, who is the famous Art Nouveau architect who is from there. So you can visit some of his works like the Willow Tea Rooms. In the Victorian times, Glasgow was the second city of the empire. Many, many, many ships were built in Glasgow, and so you see remnants of its grand industrial age with beautiful buildings like this and beautiful buildings like this. So it's just a joy to walk around. And Rick has some really nice walking tours that you can use in our guidebook to just take yourself through and enjoy it. So it's a lot of fun. They also have a great botanical garden with some gorgeous greenhouses. So on a rainy day, you can creep away in there and get a nice escape. And also in the spring, it's absolutely lovely. The most important museum in Glasgow to visit is the Kelvingrove Art Gallery. It's sort of a Smithsonian, but it's really fun to check out. Again, it's free, so that's fabulous. Another really interesting museum to check out if you are in Glasgow is the Museum of Transport on the Riverside. So really interesting modern architecture from the outside, and it is chock full of antique buses and trolleys and everything like that. So it's a lot of fun. Glasgow makes a good day trip from Edinburgh. If you have 3 or 4 days in Edinburgh, I would definitely consider spending one of them in Glasgow. As I mentioned, it's a great city for culture, has a lot of nightlife, lots of fun restaurants, delicious restaurants, and also lots of music. So I didn't mention this, but Edinburgh is actually a UNESCO World City of Literature. So it has that official status of being recognized for its literary contributions. Glasgow is a UNESCO World City of Music. So across the board, but lots of great live music to be had in the pubs in Glasgow and everything like that. Okay, Central Scotland. So first of all, I just want to address the fact that Glasgow and Edinburgh, that area is typically what people call central Scotland, the central belt. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about places that you can go either as a day trip from those cities to the north, or places that would make a relatively easy overnight stop. So kind of not the far, far north and the far highlands, and also not the central belt, or below that, the border regions. So just kind of this area, including St. Andrews, what you see on the map, Kenmore, Stirling, and some other places, okay? So by the way, this is a map of our guided tour of Scotland. So most of the slides that I'm going to show you follow this route or come from somewhere on this route, with the exception of one or two. So at any rate, let's get started. Stirling Castle is probably the most popular day trip from Edinburgh or Glasgow, and it's well worth visiting. Even if you visited Edinburgh Castle, it's absolutely worth visiting. It's only about 30-40 minutes by train from either of those cities. And again, it's just beautifully, beautifully situated, and there are a few other sites associated with it. But the castle itself, of course, is a castle complex containing lots of different sites within it. So you have the Great Hall, what was the largest secular medieval space in Europe at one point. You have the Stirling Heads Gallery. So these are giant oak medallions that would have been at one point colorfully painted and stuck to the ceiling of the king's chambers in the castle. And of course, they're thoughtfully explained and everything like that, so it's very fascinating. My favorite part of Stirling Castle is actually the kitchens. So you can go down a staircase into the dark kitchens, and they have all this fake food set up, and you can learn about what it took to feed this entire community of people living within the castle walls. So a lot to be seen. And you have docents in character and in costume, so you can ask them about what it's like to live in the castle and serve whichever king and queen they were serving at that time. So north of the Forth, Stirling Castle was really important because it was kind of the only place that you could get from the lowlands into the highlands. They would say whoever holds Stirling holds Scotland, because it's up on that hill, you can defend it very easily, and you can see for miles and miles and miles. And the reason that you can't just go north is because it's cut off by a body of water. So eventually a river turns into this big inlet, and this body of water is called the Firth of Forth. So to go straight north from Edinburgh, you cross over the Firth of Forth, and at any rate, that's what we're going to do right now for some of the sites just to the north. If you have a car, a good first stop heading north from Edinburgh might be Curras Palace, and it looks like Culross, but it's sort of Curras. What it is a medieval royal borough, a burgh. So the palace itself is actually just a house that belonged to this rich industrialist at the end of the 1500s and early 1600s. So you get to see what his life was like, what his home, the inside of his home looked like, and you can take a tour of it. It also has a beautiful market square in the town itself that you can check out. So it's just a really lovely little town to explore and a fascinating site from a historical perspective. Anybody who's a fan of Outlander, the Outlander series, also they filmed some of the episodes, or some scenes from some of the episodes, also in Curras Palace and in Curras Town. St. Andrews is a bit further north, and of course St. Andrews is famous for being the home of golf. It's also a university town, but I think if you're a golf person, you absolutely have to take a trip to St. Andrews. You may not get to play on the old course. In fact, you probably won't, but there are plenty of other great golf courses in the area. So don't be put off. You can just have a stroll around, or you can go putting just next door at the Himalayas, which I just think is such a cute name for a putting green. But at any rate, golf lovers might also enjoy the Golf Museum, which is a lot of fun. I'm personally I'm not a golfer. But I love the Golf Museum. It's a lot of fun to just learn about the history of the sport. And non-golfers will just enjoy the beautiful beaches in St. Andrews, or exploring the ruins of their cathedral. So St. Andrews was a very important ecclesiastical center. It's sort of the epicenter of the Scottish Reformation, and for a long time before that, that's where pilgrims went. And you can see the ruins of its cathedral today. It's free to roam around, or you can pay to go up in the tower. Another stop that you might consider that's often overlooked is the city of Dundee. So it's a smaller city, I think about 150,000 people, but it's a good place to stop for a few reasons. One, there is the RSS Discovery ship and center. So this was an Arctic exploring vessel, a three-masted traditional wooden vessel. It was built in 1900, I think, and that was what Ernest Shackleton and Falcon Scott went exploring in the Arctic in. So there's the whole visitor center, and that's where the ship is docked, and it was built in Dundee originally, so it's in its home. Adjacent to the RSS Discovery is the new Victoria and Albert Museum of Design. So there's the one in London, and now there's one in Dundee, which is a city that's well known for its contributions to design. And Dundee was also an industrial powerhouse like Glasgow, and the primary thing that was made there was jute. And they have a wonderful museum called the Verdant Works, and it's all about the jute industry. So you have some of the old machines, and it doesn't necessarily sound like the most fascinating thing, but it really is a great museum. So if you're driving north anyway, I would encourage you to stop in Dundee for a quick look around. One of my favorite small towns in Scotland is the town of Dunkeld. So Dunkeld, you can drive there, but it is also on the train line going north. So it has a sort of a twin town, Dunkeld and Burnham. Burnham of Burnham Wood fame, for those who know their Shakespeare. But at any rate, Dunkeld is a beautiful little town, very cute. It has a gorgeous arched stone bridge over the river that was built by the famous Scottish engineer Thomas Telford. It's just a lovely place to wander around and check out the shops, have a nice pub lunch by the river, and it also has some cathedral ruins. So before St. Andrews, Dunkeld was sort of the ecclesiastical center in Scotland. So after the Vikings came and they moved inland, I'll talk about that later, but Dunkeld was a very important center. And today, the cathedral itself is in ruins, but the internal part is still used as the church for the town. So it's a nice visit. Dunkeld is situated in a part of Scotland called Perthshire, and Perthshire is Scotland's big tree country. So it kind of reminds me of the Pacific Northwest a fair amount, but what that means for travelers is that it's a great place to go hiking or just hill walking or just on a nice gentle walk in the forest. A popular walk just outside of Dunkeld is called the Hermitage, and it's an easy path, as you can see here, and it was just the property of one of the local aristocracy who built a little forested getaway and a little fake cave, a little cave where he had a fake hermit hide out and surprise his guests to woo them. Another option for a quaint small town to stay would be the village of Kenmore. It's really quite small, but absolutely beautifully situated, as you can see. And it does have one kind of must-do, in my opinion, site, which is the Kenmore Crannog Centre. So you might be thinking, what on earth is a crannog, right? But what it is basically a fortified dwelling that would have been inhabited basically back in the Iron Age. And they found remnants of these in lakes all over Scotland and in Ireland as well. And this is one that's been thoughtfully reconstructed using all of the same methods that it would have been constructed all those years ago. So it's a museum. You actually can go out into the crannog, and all of the people who work there are just really passionate about life back then, life in the Iron Age. They'll tell you all about what happened, what the people ate, how they lived, how they built things, how they survived. So it's very fascinating, and you even get to learn about some of that Iron Age technology, making fire with sticks and all that type of thing. So after you visit the Crannog Centre or the crannog itself, then you come back onto land for a demonstration of some of that technology. So I absolutely love it. It is just takes you right back in time, and it's fabulous. Also in the area are a lot of whiskey distilleries. Of course, this is true for most regions in Scotland, so this isn't the only place that you can go to a distillery, but it's a nice option if you don't have a ton of time and maybe you're in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and then maybe you just have a day or two to do an overnight. You can't get that far north, and you want to be in the countryside and check out a distillery or two. So lots in the area, just throwing that out there. But usually you can get a tour, and then that comes with a tasting at the end, so I'd encourage you to check that out. Inverness and the Highlands. So now we are sort of not in the far north of Scotland, but about 3 hours by train north of Edinburgh and Inverness. So Inverness itself is kind of just a small workaday city, but it's nicely situated on the River Ness. It has a castle, which is actually now the courthouse, and that has a viewing platform. You can see it in the slide, the big building up on the hill there. They also have a nice local museum that talks about some of the local history and everything like that, so that's worth checking out. But really, Inverness just makes a good home base for exploring the area, so I'm going to talk about some of the things that you might want to check out while you're up in that part of Scotland. Of course, there are lots of opportunities for taking walks in the woods. If you're in the city itself, you can actually just walk along the river, and there's a beautiful park that kind of connects some islands across the river, so that's a nice option. Or you can head outside of the city to various places where you can take a walk. The Cairngorms National Park is to the south and east of Inverness, so it's a great place if you're a serious hiker or you want to just find a nice kind of easier walk, but really feel what it's like to be out in the mountains and out in the countryside and in the woods in Scotland. So when you're in the Highlands or when you're anywhere in Scotland, in the summertime, there are Highland games happening all over the country. So not every single little town, but most towns have their own Highland games. So you can just look online or ask around locally if you already have your trip planned and you can't make adjustments for it. Just see if you can find out if there are any Highland games happening in any towns where you might be while you're there. Because they're a lot of fun. You can see all of the heavyweight games, things like that, tossing the caber, basically throwing an entire tree trunk, over itself, things like that. Highland dancing, it's a lot of fun, and it's a fun activity for an individual or for a family. So check that out. Another thing that's a lot of fun is visiting a sheepdog demonstration. So we do this on our tour of Scotland on our way north to Inverness. This one is listed in the guidebook. It's called Lealt Farms. So you can go and have a demonstration of how these sheepdogs wrangle these sheep and learn all about the life from the local shepherd, whose name is Neil. And he and his dogs, the dogs are just incredible, so it's really fascinating. He might even drag over a sheep and let you give it a shot shearing. And sometimes they have puppies. Not all the time, but it's pretty special when they do. So you can go visit Neil on his sheepdog farm and hopefully get to meet some of his newborn puppies. Another popular site to visit close to Inverness is the Clava Cairns. So if you're interested in Neolithic history or any kind of prehistory, who are the people who erected standing stones and things like that, this is a really wonderful site to visit. It's free. It's just out in the open, and what it is 3 Neolithic burial chambers. So 2 of them are passage cairns or passage graves, and there are some standing stones around the cairns themselves. So that's a great place we visit. It's also said to be the place that Diana Gabaldon got her inspiration for the story of Outlander with the split stone where Claire passes through time. So Outlander fans have to make a visit to the Clava Cairns also. But it's a wonderful site. And we have a picnic there on our tour. Picnicking is a great way to save a bit of money and just have a really nice experience. So you can either pick up a quick sandwich from the grocery store, or you can go all out and get, smoked salmon and the lot and have a whole spread, but it's just a really enjoyable thing to do. Of course, you hope that you get the good weather for it, but even if you don't, it can be a lot of fun. It can be a little adventure. Another site close to Inverness that is an absolute must on any trip to Scotland, if you're heading to the Highlands, is the battlefield of Culloden. Battlefield of Culloden was where the last pitched battle on British soil took place. It is a very important site to Scottish people. It's still has a lot of emotional quality to it. It's a very, very important site. A lot of people have the misconception that it was actually Scottish army versus English army, but it was really an army of Hanoverian supporters, or the Hanoverian kings of Britain, versus the ousted Stuart kings, or the supporters of King James. So those were known as the Jacobites. So it was the Jacobites versus the Hanoverians, and the Jacobites were absolutely slaughtered. And after that point, because most of the supporters of the Jacobite cause were Highlanders, their traditional ways were banned. So it kind of represents the end of the traditional Highland way of life. So it's very, touches the heart of a lot of Scottish people very deeply. Outside of the center, you have the memorial. The protruding bricks represent the fallen soldiers from each army. So you see in the foreground, there are just a handful of Hanoverians. and then in the background, just extending way back to the battlefield, represent each individual lost life of a Jacobite soldier. So, of course, it's a battlefield, but it has a really wonderful state-of-the-art visitor center that's high-tech. You can go through, and on one side, you have the point of view of all the events leading up to the battle and the battle from the Hanoverian side, and along the other side is the Jacobite point of view. So it's a very interesting experience altogether, very interactive. You can actually go into a room and they project onto the walls what happened it's the battle commencing. So you literally are putting yourself in the middle of this battlefield as the troops are lining up and start to fight. So it's really a moving experience. All over Scotland, you find castles and palaces of local aristocracy. One that is a really fun visit is Cawdor Castle. It also has some connection to the Thanes of Cawdor, again, Shakespeare. But, you know, that's all kind of tenuous, really. But at any rate, Cawdor Castle is still lived in by the current local aristocrat. She is the Dowager Countess of Cawdor. So I think it's a lovely visit for a couple of reasons. One, it's really cool to just see a Scottish castle, right? I mean, it just looks impressive. Two, you get to see what it looks like inside. You get to see it with the furnishings. So you can kind of imagine, you know, this is, if I were this woman, this is where I would live. This is what my home would look like. So it's a cool visit in that sense too. And it just has beautiful, beautiful gardens. So especially in the spring, you can wander the grounds and it is just a lovely experience. That being said, there are castles all over Scotland and manor houses all over Scotland, each with their own unique charm. So don't feel tied to this one in particular. Just, you know, look around, do a little bit of research. Some of them, including Cawdor, actually have their own little half-course golf course. So that's a nice experience to have too. You can play a little game of golf. So leaving Inverness, heading south and west, you follow what's actually a geological fault line, the Great Glen Fault. And it's also the Caledonian Canal. So essentially, this fault line is full of lakes, and there was a giant engineering project spearheaded by the famous Scottish architect Thomas Telford, and he basically connected them all together with miles and miles of canals. So there are 22 locks along the whole of the thing. And it's really just used nowadays kind of for pleasure boating and like, but it's an absolutely beautiful drive. If you want, you can stop in the town of Fort Augustus and visit the Caledonian Canal Visitor Center, or just watch the locks and have a bit of lunch. But keep an eye out for beautiful places to pull over and just enjoy being in this part of the country. This is a Thomas Telford bridge in the town just outside of the town of Invermoriston along the Caledonian Canal. One popular spot along the Caledonian Canal, well, the most popular spot is Loch Ness. If you want, you can visit some of the Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster sites, and learn about that. For me, it's just a beautiful place, just beautiful being in the Highlands. And you can visit Urquhart Castle, which is one of Scotland's many castles. It's mostly a ruin, but it's actually very thoughtfully signposted. So when you walk around, you can read about what used to be in this part of the castle, what was this used for, and some of the local history. So it's a nice visit. You can actually take a small boat cruise down part of the loch and be dropped off at Urquhart Castle, and then cruise back, or however you want to do it. That's an option also. As I said, if you're interested in Nessie, you can seek her out, and you know, this person's just pretending Nessie's actually very friendly. So. One of the most famous and well-deservedly famous sites in the Scottish Highlands is Glencoe. So just absolutely stunning mountain scenery. It has its own history, sort of sad history. There was a famous massacre that happened there back in the late 1600s. It's known as the Weeping Glen. And people say it's because of this massacre, but I've heard it's actually because of the waterfalls that creep down the mountains. But it's a beautiful, beautiful drive. Even if you don't have a lot of time and you're just driving through, pull over and just get out and walk for a few minutes. If you don't have all day, if don't have a few days to do a hike, just pull over and get out and walk and enjoy the fresh Highland air and take in some of this absolutely stunning scenery. I really don't think that there's anywhere else in the world that I've been that quite compares to that beauty. So in the west of Scotland, off of the coast, of course, there are many, many islands, and the jumping off point to get to most of these islands, or many of these islands, is the seaside town of Oban. Oban is a pretty small place, but really cute. You can see its harbor front here. It's very charming. Up on the hill, you have this sort of unfinished Colosseum that's called McCaig's Tower that you can hike up through the neighborhoods and check out people's gardens and just get nice sweeping views over the water. Oban is known as the gateway to the Isles, so it's a great little seaside town. Our tour groups like to stay in B&Bs just on the esplanade there by the water, so lots of really great B&B options in Oban, and you can just sit out front and enjoy views like this. So it's absolutely a charming town with beautiful views to boot. Not surprisingly, there is a lot of great seafood in Oban. This is the ferry terminal, but you can see all the little fishing boats there. So just wander down, even if you're not taking a day trip out to any of the islands or heading out for longer trips to any of the islands, and see what's been caught fresh. You don't have to eat in a fancy seafood restaurant either to enjoy this. There are a couple of just small sort of walk up and order and then take your stuff to a picnic table seafood restaurants right there by the ferry terminal, and you can see that that's a pretty nice looking seafood platter for a pretty affordable price just to enjoy right there on the water. So I'd highly recommend that. The most popular and also probably most accessible trip out to an island from Oban is to the Isle of Mull and to the Isle of Iona. So Iona is Scotland's holy isle. It is where Christianity came at the end of the 6th century, so the late 500s, from Ireland to Scotland. So it's very important from that respect, but it's also just a very peaceful, beautiful island. So you can do a day trip. You have to take the ferry to Mull and then drive across Mull and then take another ferry to get to Iona. But being on the ferry is a really enjoyable experience anyway. It is, first of all, an important part of Scottish life. For people who live out in the islands, it is a literal lifeline, and it's just a lot of fun to have all that fresh air, and usually there's a pub on the boat if you want to just get a pint and pass the time. You can absolutely do that. Sometimes you might even find a bunch of people playing music, especially in the summer. People going to and from music festivals, young musicians, just having a tune. So it's great. If you are going just for the day trip to Iona, you probably won't stop in the main town on Mull, which is Tobermory. It's not where the ferry gets in. You would get off the ferry and then drive north. But if you would like to stay in Mull and not just do the day trip like most people do, Tobermory is a really nice option. It has a distillery, and as you can see, it's just a really lovely little town by the water. But for most day trippers, or most people who travel out to Mull who are visiting from abroad, drive across the island, which itself is stunning. And usually you have it, if you're not driving yourself, you would be taking a bus and you might have a narrated guide on the way over. You might have a guide narrating your trip across Mull, talking about the wildlife and the sea eagles and all of the really interesting geology and the sea cliffs and everything like that. So it's just a stunning island with a lot to offer. You get to the far end and suddenly it looks like you're in Greece or something, and you have this pink granite and white sand and turquoise water, and then you hop on board a little teeny tiny ferry for another 10-minute ferry ride. Wait patiently, and then this is what you come to. So again, this is Iona, Scotland's holy island. It is just absolutely stunning, especially when you have beautiful weather like this. I mean, can you believe that that's not in the Caribbean, really, that water? So the Abbey is there. It's not the original Abbey, of course, but it still has a very active church community, and it's ecumenical, so it's just they welcome everybody. And you can go and spend some time there and do a retreat, or you can just walk through and check it out and be on your way. But I just find it to be a very, very peaceful and wonderful place. You can stroll through the graveyard where ages and ages ago many of the kings of Scotland were buried, or the nunnery ruins. My favorite site in Iona is the local heritage center. It's a small museum with a cafe out back, and you just learn about the local history, and they have things on display like all of the different types of seashells found on the island and all of the different types of rocks from different areas, and it's just a really fun way to learn about a very particular community and a very particular place in Scotland. So I enjoy checking out all of the little tiny museums, not just in Iona, but wherever I happen to be when you're driving through. When you're driving through any small town in Scotland, pull over and pop into a bakery and ask, hey, is there any small museum or anything happening in this town? And just check it out. Get right in there. If you have a couple of hours, check out some of Iona's beaches. Absolutely stunning, white sandy beaches. The water is not warm, but you can definitely take off your shoes and socks and at least just go for a little wade, which in Scotland they would call it a paddle. Go for a paddle. I just want to give a quick plug here for the Western Isles. So we don't really cover the islands that are further out off of the coast. We cover in our guidebooks, that is, we cover Mull and Iona, of course. But if that looks like heaven to you, I would just encourage you to consider going further to Lewis and Harris, the islands of Lewis and Harris. You might not think you've heard of Harris, but if you've heard of Harris Tweed, you've heard of Harris. North and South Uist, Barra, all of these islands are just not heavily visited at all, and some of them have some of the most stunning beaches you've ever seen. Another very popular place to visit in Scotland is the Isle of Skye. It is an island, but you can drive there conveniently. They have a bridge, so you can take a ferry from one point, or you can just drive across, which is really handy. You definitely want to have a car. You can get there by bus. The train does not go there, but if you want to be able to get around, it's going to be handy to have a car. There are also buses that go around the island, but there's not going to be any service on Sunday, and it will be infrequent. And if you want to really get out and explore, just drive yourself. Skye's main appeal, of course, is just the stunning scenery and this incredible, it's unparalleled. Again, there are many places in Scotland like this with just unparalleled beauty of scenery. Famous for its fairy pools, and it's just a great place for hiking. You can do some serious mountaineering and climbing up some of the taller peaks, or just go for shorter walks on nice, easy trails like this. The main town on Skye is Portree. That's the name of it. And I mentioned this in an earlier part of the talk, but if you're going to Skye, again, I want to stress, please book your accommodation well ahead of time. It is very popular, and there are not tons of places to stay anyway, so you'll need to book well in advance. Whether you stay in Portree or whether you go to Skye at all and you find yourself in another town and another island or some other part of the Highlands, just ask around. Go into the pub. If there's a tourist info office, go in. Go into a bakery. Ask people you meet on the street what's happening in town. Because in the Highlands and in the islands, a lot of time, especially in the summer, you have local events happening, local musical summer camps and things like that. So a couple of the things that you want to be on the lookout for are, is there any ceilidh happening? A ceilidh means a gathering, but really what it typically is a dance. So find that local dance. It doesn't matter if you don't know how. They will teach you, or you don't have to learn. You can just sit and watch, but it is an unparalleled, fun experience that is very unique to Scotland. So I'd encourage you to ask around and try and seek something like this out. If you're very lucky, you might even encounter in a pub something like this, which I did once upon a time. 8 people all playing the Great Highland bagpipes inside the pub. Whew. What do you think? But really, really phenomenal, kind of, for me, life-changing experience. Might be a little bit too much for you, like some people in the pub, but hey, you're never going to forget that if you happen upon something like that. Or even if you happen upon something a little bit quieter. So I mentioned ceilidhs. That's going to be a dance or a gathering. You can also ask people, where is there a session happening? And a session would just be people in a pub, most likely, playing tunes. And it's not a performance, it's not a concert, it's just 1 or 2 people who are going to be there for a particular period of time, and whoever else wants to come and join and play tunes with them will come and join. So it's just live traditional Scottish music, and for me that's one of the best things that Scotland has to offer. So try and seek it out. Either way, just remember to stop and breathe and take it all in. Enjoy all that fresh air and enjoy all the beautiful, breathtaking views, and happy travels. So thank you very much for coming.